A verdict has been reached in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Inflation may be here to stay, and Kamala Harris makes history. That and more on this week's headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Alex Jones has been found liable in 4 defamation cases over suggesting the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012 was a hoax staged by crisis actors. Jones did later backtrack on that, but it didn't stop the lawsuit. The cases will now go to juries who will decide how much Jones will have to pay to the families of the victims. Jones was found liable by default since he didn't turn over documents he was ordered to by the court. Wait a minute, you're telling me Alex Jones didn't back up one of his claims with actual evidence? This can only mean one thing.
The deep state has kidnapped him and are holding him in one of their hollowed-out moon bases. The Clockwork Elves are farming his fluids for energy to fuel the psychic pedophile vampires whose bathwater runoff is going into our streams and oceans and turning the frogs gay.
Failed presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke has announced he's going to run for governor of Texas. O'Rourke said, "I'm running to serve the people of Texas, and I want to make sure that we have a governor that serves everyone, helps to bring this state together to do the really big things before us, and get past the small, divisive politics and policies of Greg Abbott." While Greg Abbott's policies, especially his abortion law, are wildly unpopular among Democrats and many centrists, O'Rourke probably isn't the man to take up this fight, since he's most well known for being a living fellow kids meme and losing a Senate race election to Ted Cruz. You know, the guy who abandoned Texas during a snowstorm and liked a pornographic tweet on September 11th, and he blamed that on a staff member, which isn't a great excuse. At any rate, O'Rourke couldn't beat that guy. Even Republicans don't really like Ted Cruz. Then again, Democrats don't really even like O'Rourke, since he was forced to end his presidential bid before the Democratic primary elections even began. Beto O'Rourke lost a Senate race, lost a presidential race, and now running for governor. May we all one day have as much unearned confidence as phony Hawk over here. In response to O'Rourke's announcement, current Texas Governor Greg Abbott said that Beto will impose socialism and take your guns. True or not, those are some solid talking points. And they'll likely make the race an even more uphill skate for O'Rourke, since socialism and take your guns are the most offensive things you can say to a Texan beside, "Whataburger is overrated," which it is. In-N-Out for life, suckers. Consider yourself messed with, Texas. If Democrats want to unseat Greg Abbott, they need to run a candidate that Texans can really get behind. And of course, I'm talking about Matthew McConaughey. No one's sure if McConaughey is actually going to run for governor, as he's hinted at many times, or even what his party affiliation is. But the Democrats should try to sway him to their side, since he's a more surefire bet than O'Rourke. And he's the only candidate in Texas who can stand up against the alt-right, alt-right, alt-right. More after the break. Welcome back. Sesame Street is set to introduce its first Asian American Muppet to the cast. The character is a 7-year-old Korean American named Ji Young. This announcement has led many to celebrate this advancement in diversity, inclusion, and representation. It also led many racist grandpas to say, "Wait, I thought Bert was Asian." This is why we're not inviting you to Thanksgiving, Pop Pop. While many are celebrating Sesame Street, I say they're way behind the times. You know who had an Asian American puppet 25 years ago? That's right, The Puzzle Place. I fully expect only 3 people watching this to remember that show. Speaking of senior citizens known for making racially insensitive remarks, Joe Biden. President Biden signed his $1 trillion infrastructure deal on the White House lawn in front of a bipartisan crowd. Biden said, With this law, we focused on getting things done. I ran for president because the only way to move our country forward, in my view, was through compromise and consensus. That's right, everyone. With compromise and consensus, you too can one day barely convince the bare minimum required to give you $1 trillion in the middle of an inflation crisis, and then immediately try and convince them to give you $1.75 trillion more. I know I'm often critical of the president, but I find the story truly inspirational. For gold diggers, especially. They should put Joe Biden's face on the $1,000 bill, since if he doesn't get inflation under control, that's how much it'll cost to buy a loaf of bread. But Joe Biden says inflation is nothing to worry about. It's only transitory. And in fact, he says his Build Back Better spending package will help alleviate inflation and will help with costs of housing, health care, and child care. Because, you know, historically, the best way to combat inflation is by printing even more money. To be fair, this plan might actually help with those costs. Because if you're forced to spend all of your money on $1,000 bread loaves, then you won't have any left to spend on housing, health care, and child care. And lower demand leads to lower prices. Galaxy brain move there, Biden. And good news for the president. On Friday morning, the House of Representatives passed the Build Back Better Act, with all Democrats voting for it and all Republicans voting against it. Compromise and consensus. Of course, now it goes to the Senate, where things look much more difficult for the bill. The House was supposed to pass this Thursday night until House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy stood up and gave a more than 8-hour speech. He didn't stop until 5 in the morning. McCarthy's speech set a record for the longest speech on the floor of the House. The previous record holder was actually Nancy Pelosi. Back in 2018, she also gave a more than 8-hour speech in a bid to force immigration votes. That didn't work, and neither did Kevin McCarthy's speech, but hey, they both set some records. People complain that Congress doesn't do anything. But while prices for most consumer goods keep rising, one thing that might actually get cheaper is Pfizer's COVID treatment pill. Pfizer will allow other generic drug companies to produce its COVID-19 pill in 95 low and middle-income countries, making it available to over half of the world's population. Pfizer submitted an application to the FDA for emergency approval of the pill. Pfizer says the treatment has been shown to reduce the risk of hospitalization after exposure to the coronavirus in high-risk adults by 89%. If true, this is very encouraging. I just hope that Bill Gates and Joe Rogan don't come out in support of this pill, because if they do, then no one on the left or the right will take it, especially when media outlets report
it's gonna track your horse's every move.
Even when imprisoned in a hollowed-out moon base while having his fluids farmed for psychic pedophile vampires, Alex Jones doesn't miss a day of work. Makes sense people don't trust Bill Gates and Joe Rogan. One thinks that just because he's a rich public figure, he's qualified to give health advice to millions of people despite having no background in medicine. And the other is Joe Rogan. People really love drinking the anti-Gates and anti-Rogan Kool-Aid. That might be the only Kool-Aid available right now because Costco announced a recall on some Kool-Aid products over very small pieces of metal or glass. How did the metal and glass get in there? Obviously from the Kool-Aid man busting through all those walls. If you're gonna break and enter, at least cover your top, you juicy menace. Then again, I wouldn't be surprised if that metal and glass were placed in there intentionally, after someone saw on some questionable news outlet that Tropical Punch Kool-Aid mixed with metal and glass makes a very effective COVID treatment. Goes down smooth. Speaking of questionable media coverage, after the break, fallout from the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Welcome back. In a trial that lasted 3 weeks, 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse was charged in the shootings of 3 men, 2 of whom were killed, during a series of altercations at protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin last summer. The jury deliberated for 4 days before reaching their unanimous verdict. The verdict on all counts was
not guilty.
And outside the courtroom, a lot of people have been weighing in on the verdict, expressing opinions that don't matter at this point because the trial is already over. Like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who on Friday called Rittenhouse a violent, dangerous man who chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. He actually didn't take a gun across state lines, but what are facts, really? And now, get ready for a lot more of this, as both the left and the right continue to politicize the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. I covered the Rittenhouse trial and the politicization of it earlier this week. Check that out. This trial was crazy in a lot of ways. The judge ruled that the men shot by Rittenhouse could be referred to as rioters and looters, but not victims. Why stop there? If I was on trial for murder, I'd want the people I allegedly killed to only be referred to as baby-eating Satanists that don't use their turn signals while driving. The judge also allowed Rittenhouse to draw the numbered slips of paper that would determine which of the jurors would make the final judgment in his case. Normally, a court clerk draws these slips. Makes sense. If I were on trial and allowed to select who judges me, the court might be confused that I somehow drew the ghost of Mr. Rogers, and he wasn't even on the jury. Then again, I don't know if I'd need any extra help being acquitted for defending myself against those baby-eating Satanists that don't use their turn signals while driving. But it's not like the prosecutor did himself any favors in the way he handled the case either. Like that time he pointed a gun at the jury and the audience, with his finger on the trigger. That's one way of trying to convince the jury. He may as well have given his closing remarks while wearing a pair of brass knuckles and telling them he knew where they slept at night. That's good lawyering. And finally, Kamala Harris made history this week by becoming the first female president of the United States. But there's a big but involved. She only became the first acting female president of the United States. That's because President Biden temporarily handed over power to Vice President Harris during his colonoscopy. Now you might think that doesn't seem like such a big deal. It must have happened before. And yes, President George W. Bush handed over power to Vice President Dick Cheney twice during his routine colonoscopies. And somehow, we all live to tell the tale. But the fact that Harris was only acting president for a few hours didn't stop some from making way too big a deal about this. President Harris was trending on Twitter, and media wrote articles about Harris making history by becoming the first woman president in U.S. history, which is technically true-ish. I thought having the first woman president in U.S. history would feel a lot more meaningful, but maybe it's just because I didn't expect it to be because of a colonoscopy. And that's a big but. So what do you think about the stories we covered this week? Let us know in the comments below, and remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. Be sure to visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.